WWT presents Meet the Chief.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Meet the Chief. My name is Tracy Byrne. I'm the head of global cyber strategy and go-to-market here at WWT. And this is an understatement this week. I am extremely excited to welcome our guest, John Kindervag. He is the original creator of Zero Trust, which is, and has been for a long time, a huge buzzword in our industry. And on top of that, he has an incredibly cool role at a company called Illumio, where he's the chief evangelist there. And that company, it's really relevant to our customers today because they focus on something that we talk about a lot, which is controlling and protecting against lateral movement once it's inside of your organization, all around zero trust principles. So welcome, John, and thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks, Tracy. It is great to be here. I love working with you guys, and so excited to be part of this podcast.
Awesome. Well, let's jump right in and talk about what you're famous for, which is zero trust. We hear this term thrown around all of the time, but we'd love to hear it from you. What in your, from your lens, and when you created this and how this evolved over the years, what is your definition of zero trust?
Yeah, so hopefully mine is authoritative, right, as the creator of Zero Trust. But Zero Trust is a strategy, right? It's first and foremost a strategy. It's not a product. And it's really designed to do two things. One is to stop data breaches. Breach isn't when you've gotten through the castle walls like we used to think of it. It's not when somebody's got into our network. A breach is defined by legal and regulatory entities like GDPR or CCPA, and it means that data that is sensitive or regulated has been exfiltrated from our networks or systems into the hands of a malicious actor. And then the other thing that Zero Trust is designed to do strategically is make other cybersecurity attacks unsuccessful. There's only two types of attacks, successful ones and unsuccessful ones. So we want all of them to be unsuccessful. And it does this by eliminating trust from digital systems. So Zero Trust was designed to be strategically resonant to the highest levels of any organization, to the grand strategic actors, and to be tactically implementable using commercially available off-the-shelf technology at whatever state that's in at the time. And I knew the technology would get better and better over time, and I knew the strategy shouldn't change. So those two things were purposefully decoupled from each other. And we've seen the success of the strategic resonance with things like the presidential executive order and other governmental entities pushing towards adopting zero trust globally.
Yeah, I was just reading actually today about the NSA and how that is officially recognized and written into that documentation, which I thought was, that I'm sure for you, that was an incredibly meaningful moment, on that scale and on that stage for something that you created to be so widely adopted and mandated. It's a very, very cool thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And then after the presidential executive order, which was just stunning to me because I think there were 14 people in my first Zero Trust speech that I did when I announced it, and then to have the president issue an executive order, and then I got appointed to a presidential commission called the NSTAC, National Security Telecommunications Advisory Committee. There was a subcommittee focusing on Zero Trust, and we issued a report to the president in February of 2022 about Zero Trust, and that had leaders from not only private sector, but it had the NSA and DISA and FBI and all kinds of top level leaders in there. So it was very, very cool to see how much resonance the Zero Trust message had gotten by that time.
Yeah, it's interesting to see kind of the evolution of our understanding of it over time and how we approach it, because when a lot of folks think about zero trust, they're thinking mostly about identity and how to lock that down. But I know in reading about how you approach this and how it's so much more multifaceted than that, it'd be really cool for you to kind of talk through with our audience, where you see the control points for zero trust, even outside of identity.
Yeah, I mean, identity is something that we consume in Zero Trust in policy to make a decision on whether to allow something or not, right? So everything comes down to policy. Policy is binary. All you can do is allow or deny. And so zero trust starts with a denial policy. And then we use multiple signals to determine whether we're going to allow something or not. And uh, and it's important to understand that if there is a negative thing that happens inside of an organization, there was a policy in place that allowed it. I have a saying that all bad things happen inside of an allow rule. And so, what we're trying to do is get very granular on how we allow or deny things. So, identity is one of the signals that we use. There's other signals that we get from the packet that we use. There could be just an innumerable number of systems that we would need to gather telemetry and signals from. And then we make a decision based upon policy whether or not to allow John to access a resource.
Mm-hmm.
And generally, we give too many people too much access to too much data for no reason other than we've always done that.
Right.
So when people say, well, zero trust is about identity, I can say, well, I can prove that's not true with two words: Snowden and Manning. They're so famous. I call them the Beyonce and the Zendaya of cybersecurity. They're one word people, right? They were trusted users on trusted devices. They had the right endpoint protection. They had the right patch levels. They had robust identity systems and powerful multi-factor authentication. But nobody looked at their traffic post authentication, nor was their network segmented. And it's the segmentation process that defines what's called the protect surface in zero trust to put a micro perimeter around it that we enforce in policy that allows us to just turn on those granular allowables.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I'm sure what the way that you approach this has morphed over the years, just depending on the threat landscape and kind of what type of attacks you're faced with. How have you seen, or I guess the question is, has your approach changed or become more nuanced with the emergence of AI specifically, or any other threats that are kind of more at the forefront now than they were when you were originally talking about this, a decade ago?
It's funny because I was just having lunch with a pretty well known CISO yesterday who has done a lot of zero trust work. And we were both talking about how neither one of us follow the threats anymore because in zero trust, there's no policy that allows that new threat, whatever it is, to come in and have access to the protect surface, the thing we're trying to protect. You have to have a policy tied to that. So there's no, this unknown resource on the public internet. There's no policy that allows it to get access to it. So I and a lot of people that I know who are deeply enmeshed in zero trust and
Mhm.
understand, how to do it in a very deep level. We don't really care about threats. I don't really care that AI is going to make more complex attacks. What I care is that AI is going to allow us to monitor and maintain and get insight and make it easier to build policy. That's where I think we win in cybersecurity. I think we have a much bigger advantage than the attackers do
Mhm.
if we're doing zero trust because uh, the attackers are still limited to TCP/IP. There's still boundaries that say, you can't go beyond this. There's no place to go.
Mhm.
And we can then ingest all of these signals and use AI to do in real time things that it used to take human beings a long time to do. So I did a zero trust managed services company before this, and by the time I left, we had no level one or level two analysts. It was all done inside the machine. And I often quote a line from the movie The Imitation Game about breaking the Nazi Enigma code when the character of Alan Turing said, what if only a machine can defeat a machine? And that's what we need to build. We need to all be building the machine that defeats the machine, which is our attackers.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm proud to be doing here at Illumio.
Oh, that is really, it's amazing to see the impact of all of this, even in the different organizations that you've been a part of. Um, and I want to double click into Illumio probably after this question, but I'd be so curious to understand, when you first were kind of building out like the base level concepts of zero trust, what led you to that moment? Like what were you working on that got you to a point where you said, I have to do this differently? And I just would love to hear that story.
I was installing firewalls, and firewalls have a trust model built into them, where they have an untrusted interface that has a trust level of 0. That's the external network or the internet. And then they have an internal network that has the highest trust level, 100, and every other interface had a different trust level, and policy was automatically determined by the trust level of that interface. So, for example, you needed a rule to go from the internal network or from the external network to the internal network, right? To go from the internet to the internal network, you needed a rule, but you didn't need a rule to go from the internal network to the external network. And I thought that was silly. And so I kept trying to put outbound rules, and I kept getting in trouble from the clients, from the vendors. You don't do that. And I said, well, what if the attacker wants to exfil data? There's nothing to stop them. And they said, oh, that would never happen. And yeah, it's going to happen. I could see that it was going to happen. And I said, the trust level of every interface should be 0 because trust is a human emotion. So it was my hatred for this firewall model that caused me to create zero trust.
That's really cool. That is it's amazing how it's withstood the test of time, and it almost like the use case gets stronger and stronger. Kind of back to what you were saying before about it doesn't matter what kind of threats are coming at you and how they evolve. Um, by leveraging a zero trust philosophy or architecture, that's how you're going to be able to withstand any of those attacks. So that's that's really neat. And I guess, to go like a little bit further back in time, how did you actually get into cyber?
Well, oddly enough, I was a broadcast engineer, and broadcast engineering has all the same concepts, routing, switching, all that kind of stuff. And it became more and more digitized, became networked. And so I started building networks. My first network was an Apple Talk network in like 1984, right? So I'd been building networks, and I met somebody who said, oh, you know how to do this networking stuff? And I said, yeah. Didn't really think much about it. And he said, how much do you make as a broadcast engineer? And I told him, and he said, well, I'll pay you this much if you come over and work for me. And I said, I'm out of here. So it was, but I had a fun run in broadcasting.
Mhm.
I was Ross Perot's primary broadcast engineer for his 1996 presidential campaign. So I spent 2.5 years almost every day with Ross Perot, and that was pretty cool. I learned a lot there. I got to meet a lot of really interesting people. Worked with Sam Walton and Larry Ellison and a lot of those folks, and learned a lot from them. And then I did some things that were pretty historic. I covered the Oklahoma City bombing for Reuters, so I was right on the front lines there. But that's a really hard and exhausting business, and so when I got the opportunity to kind of transition sideways and go full time into networking, and I started out as a network engineer, I just did it, and then uh, when I was doing networking. There was a need for somebody to do security, and none of the networking people thought there was any future in security, and I was the only one willing to give it a shot. So I kind of stumbled into it by accident.
That's I feel like that's a really common, not your story. Your story is very cool, especially with your background and what you did. But the theme of stumbling into cybersecurity, I feel like almost everyone I know has a similar emotion where it was you have the characteristics of you're a problem solver, you're curious, you have technical chops, and then applying it to cybersecurity, it's like an addiction because the threats are always changing, the ways that you can solve a problem. It's very open ended. So I'm sure that was something you found so much passion in.
And I think it appeals to a lot of us who want to try to do something to make the world a little bit better every day, right? Because that's what you're doing in cybersecurity. There's three adversarial businesses in the world. There's the military, there's there's law enforcement, and there's cybersecurity. You have an adversary that you're trying to protect people against, and and they're normal people who can't protect themselves, because this is, I mean, there's so many things that even I can't do to help myself. I'm just, how is this some AI company going to use my data? I can't control that, right?
Yeah.
So, but I can help companies and other organizations be protected so that they don't suffer data breaches and cause problems for other people. Because when it was, people will say to me, that wasn't a very big data breach. That was only 2 million records, and I'll say, yeah, but for every record, there's a person behind that.
Yeah.
And when you talk to them, I was at an event. I met a famous race car driver, sat next to this person, and they were telling me that they had just had their identity stolen, and just the pain. What could I do to help? And I was fairly helpless. I mean, I called some friends at the FBI and gave some advice, but I was
Mhm.
pretty helpless. And the only way we can help those people is to make sure it doesn't happen. That's how we help those people.
Yeah. No, it's so true. And identity theft, it's unless you've gone through it yourself or know someone very close that has, it's a nightmare and it lasts forever. And it constantly is kind of over your shoulder and you have to just constantly be validating. So it is a major, major issue. One of the things that I find kind of interesting, especially in like just like the nomenclature you used when you developed zero trust, it's it's funny the way you were describing it, where it's like we have to equip large corporations, small, any size corporations, really though, with this type of architecture, because inherently as consumers, we have to have 100% trust, because there's no in between for how we interact with the business. Essentially, if you're interacting with a bank, like that's full trust, to let them have your data, to let them manage your livelihood. So it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts around that.
Yeah, because I'm always trying to uh, decouple digital trust and human trust, right? Which is something that people confuse a lot. And so in the human world, Gladwell calls us trust agents, and we are, right? But also, if you look at a human definition, like from Morton Deutsch in 1958, he says trust can be defined as the the willingness of one person to be vulnerable to another person. So
Hmm.
when we give all of our money and information to a bank, for example, we're being very vulnerable to that bank. And so what that bank needs to do is have a zero trust model in the digital world, because it's just a packet, right? So I'm not saying that people aren't trustworthy. I'm saying people aren't packets. So when we anthropomorphize the network and we say, well, John is on the network and Tracy is on the network. Well, neither one of us are on the network, right? You're sitting in St. Louis. I'm sitting in Dallas. Neither one of us is shrunken down into a subatomic particle and then sent over our Wi-Fi to the recording software that we're using today. That hasn't happened to us ever. It's never happened to a human being. It rarely even happens in the movies, Lawnmower Man, Tron, Wreck It Ralph. But even in the Matrix, they got to plug in, right? So it's this that I'm trying to teach people is, yeah, we're going to be trusting as human beings to other human beings or to other entities that are part of that. But in our digital systems, let's get rid of trust as a concept, because it causes phenomenal amounts of problems.
Yeah. It's really cool to hear your thoughts around that. And it's I feel so fortunate to have you on the show, really, as such a thought leader, in the industry. It would be interesting to hear about what you do outside of tech, though. So I know that this is a pretty consuming line of work, right? But do you have certain things like hobbies or interests outside of work that you really dive into?
I think most of what I do outside of work is really, well, there's two things, mostly family, right? So I have a son, a daughter, a son in law. They're grown, but I see them a lot. And then I have other extended family that I'm very close to. So my niece has a 2-year old daughter, but she just had twin fraternal boys. So they're 3 months old now. And my wife and I go over a couple times a week and do their nighttime feedings to let my niece and her husband get a little bit of rest. So we're very involved in that. And the other thing that I do is I'm involved in veterans organizations, helping veterans transition out of the military and mentoring them on how to be in the private sector and how to get a job and how well we have this huge crisis in this country of veteran suicides. Statistically, 22 people a day who are veterans kill themselves, and so I'm working with a couple of organizations to try to reduce that by making those people feel like they provide as much value to civilian society as they did to the military.
That's that's amazing, and that is such hard, gut wrenching work. And I'm sure, even if you just impact one or two people and you can see them thriving and getting the same joy that you feel out of your work, being able to transition that skill set, I'm sure that is just so rewarding.
Well, and so many of them are set up for the kind of work we do, right?
Mhm.
And they just need the opportunity, but sometimes they can't get through HR because, well, you don't have this certification and you don't have that certification, and
That's awesome. So it's so great to hear about the ways that you're giving back, and using your reach to help people who not only are going to get personal fulfillment out of it, but they're going to give back so much to all of us. Kind of like you were saying, where this isn't, what we do in our work isn't just for us. Everyone gets better for it. We are more protected for it as a society, and so that's really really cool. So
yeah, I
let's.
mean we're in an adversarial business, but uh, digital bullets don't hurt as much as real ones, right? So
Mhm.
sometimes the people that I work with and go see, I mean, what they've been through, I just can't imagine, and I think society just needs to step up, and especially employers need to step up. What these people want are opportunities and jobs and just all the benefits that we had. But if you go into the military when you're 18 and you come out when you're 28,
Mhm.
that's 10 years you missed, and the world still feels like you're 18 again. And so I think trying for them to catch up to that is a really hard thing to do, and so I've been spending time with a lot of them to help them do that.
Oh, that's wonderful, and that's primarily in Austin.
Dallas,
Oh, it's in
Dallas
Dallas.
market.
It's in Dallas.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Wow.
But I am connected to people all over, so it's fun. It's really rewarding, and when you find somebody who's gotten a job and you can see them getting their life back together, because a lot of them come pretty broken, and so it's just something that I enjoy doing.
Yeah.
I fell into that accidentally too. Met somebody who said, "No, you're going to go help do this." I'm like, "Okay, yes, sir."
Oh man, I bet you're so glad you did. That is awesome. That
Yeah.
is really awesome. Well, one of the things I wanted to talk a little bit more about as well is your work at Illumio, because you guys are solving some really difficult challenges for your customers. Can you talk to us just a little bit, kind of changing gears into more of like the tech and how it works? What are some of the core use cases that you're seeing that are just popping up again and again where you guys can help out?
Well, I've been the second report I ever wrote. Let me pick that up. The second zero trust report I ever wrote was called "Build Security into Your Network's DNA: The Zero Trust Network Architecture," and I wrote that in November of 2010, which was 2 months after I wrote the original No More Chewy Centers report. And in that report, I called out centralization of the management consoles and segmentation is the key technology focuses that we needed to start our zero trust journeys with, because the primary concept of zero trust is you segment away uh, the important data or assets that you need to protect into what's known as a protect surface and put a micro perimeter around it. And segmentation technology does that. And so when I had an opportunity to come to Illumio, which I have known since the founding of it, I know the founders for a long time. I thought, okay, this is a way for me to take back the narrative and really focus the foundation on what it should be, which is segmentation. That's the foundation of your zero trust environment. You will then build other things on top of it, but just like a building that will fall down in an earthquake if there's a improper foundation, so too will your network fall if you don't have a good foundation for your zero trust environment. And so that's why I came to Illumio, because what we do is we segment networks very easily and very simply and very cost effectively to define these protect surfaces so that not everything in the world has access to it. Right? So just like Snowden and Manning had access to resources that they didn't need to use in their day-to-day business because the network was unsegmented. Once you got onto that network, you got access to everything on that network. In a zero trust environment, we want to segment the important data or assets away into their separate protect surfaces so that we can control granularly who or what can have access to that particular resource. And so it's a very, very effective tool to begin your zero trust journey and then add other things on top of it, just like you would build a foundation for a home or a building. You know, you make sure that's really solid and then you build on top of it. And so that's why I came to Illumio, because I thought this is a great place to start your journey.
Absolutely. It's so foundational. And it kind of makes you think, from what you're seeing out there when you're working with, clients of all sizes, do you find that most customers are already doing some form of segmentation? And where do you see Illumio kind of fitting in where they do things a little bit differently to make that, something that's more accessible or more operational for your customers?
I see people think they do segmentation, but they kind of misunderstand it. So
Hmm.
they don't do real segmentation. A lot of them think that because they've set up a whole bunch of VLANs, they've segmented the network. And anybody who's ever, done any pen testing or anything knows that VLANs are like the yellow line on the highway. You're not supposed to cross them, but there's nothing that's going to stop you from doing it. So they're designed to break up broadcast domains. They're not a security tool. And what makes Illumio so different than everything else is it's really an orchestration platform for existing native technologies that are already part of your system, and it makes it easier to use those for purposes of segmentation. So, for example, we put a little application on Windows or Linux or Mac environments that orchestrate the native stateful firewall that's already built in there without disrupting the operating system at all. And so it's all about then managing that thing, all of that systems from a centralized point using simple, easy to read and easy to write languages, human readable stuff that we call labels. And so you label things, and then automatically that will build the rule for Windows filtering service or IP tables or whatever it is in the proper syntax without you having to know it. And in this way, you can easily manage hundreds of thousands of of these nodes in a way that gives you tremendous amount of visibility into what data or assets you have, what's talking to them, and you can then have, using AI engines, uh, get recommendations on how you should secure it. So it just makes it so simple, and simplicity, is a great thing to have in these complex worlds that we live in.
It truly is. And it makes it so that the practitioners are able to actually use it to its full capability, which I think is one of the challenges we always kind of run into in the cybersecurity world, where we have tools upon tools. But if you don't have either the staff to be able to manage those incoming alerts or leverage the tools or roll them out to their full capabilities, you're just not going to get that value. So that's great. And one of the things I was wondering about, and you talked about it a bit, and I don't know if you can share this, but how do you guys envision leveraging AI more in your tool set?
Well, we've already released it into our latest version, but We have an integration with Microsoft Copilot, and using that engine, we can look at the metadata and
Mhm.
a lot of the flow information that we get from the packet to determine things that maybe are good, bad, you should look at. And we also have a way of kind of guiding you through how to configure it, so you don't have to read a manual anymore or anything like that. It will the virtual assistant will help you manage the Illumio console, and so that's a couple of examples of things that we've already built in. We announced them at RSA, we showed them live, and they're already out there in those customer environments, helping people become more efficient in managing those environments. So, we can manage massive environments with very few resources, and it's quite stunning to me, actually, having come up from the old command line world of cybersecurity to see where we're at today.
Yes. Oh, I'm sure that is very satisfying to see how much easier like AI has made all of these technologies and what you guys are doing to truly bring something to those practitioners where they can be more effective and they're not bogged down just on the manual tasks.
Absolutely, yeah. It's pretty cool to see in just a single generation of cybersecurity how far we've come. But it's
Agreed.
also sometimes disheartening to see how far we still have to go and how much legacy thinking we still have. So I'm a little bit divided there sometimes.
Yeah, well, it kind of leads me to the next kind of curiosity question I have for you. Just knowing that you are a pioneer and you're oftentimes creating change in our industry. What do you think is the next big thing? Right? I know that we're going to be going through the AI cycle for a long time, but what else do you see out there that's going to be the next big movement in cyber?
Um, I think there has to be some movements around data security and data governance that we've been unwilling to tackle. Not that we couldn't technologically do it, but we don't have the will to do it. In fact, that's probably one of the biggest problems that I see in cybersecurity, is that a lot of organizations just don't have the will to secure themselves. They just think it's going to be too hard, it's too expensive, and they kind of really don't care. And we're going to see that change with some of the SEC and DOJ actions that have happened against CISOs and probably against CEOs soon. So, cybersecurity and zero trust are becoming board level topics. So that's going to be good. We're going to need to change the incentive structure in organizations to make people feel like they can actually do good cybersecurity, because a lot of practitioners are managing their own individual downside risk instead
Yes.
of reducing the organization's risk. So, boy, I know that I need to do this or that or the other thing, but I'm not going to do it because if it doesn't work, I'm going to get in trouble. And there's no incentive to try to make things better. You don't get in trouble for essentially doing nothing, right? But you could get in trouble for trying to do something that is the proper intentions, and it didn't work out right, and there was a minor disruption, and because in that CIA triangle that we all talk about but no one knows what it actually is or who created it,
Hmm.
all we care about is availability, right?
Yeah.
The availability is this massively long hypotenuse of an isosceles triangle. It's no longer an equilateral triangle that we draw in our little books. And the C now stands for compromise. We have a lot of highly available yet compromised networks, and we can tell that by the amount of dwell time that we see out there. So, most companies don't know they've been compromised. They just know the network's up and running, and that's all they care about. We're moving packets, yay!
Right, right. And you also brought up something that's really interesting that I've had a lot of conversations with some of my friends in the industry about too, which is one of the, I guess, unspoken tasks of the CISO is managing their own personal risk, because they do put themselves in vulnerable positions in these roles. Can you talk a little bit just about like what you're seeing out there as far as like what that actually looks like for those of the viewers who might not be familiar with the risk that a CISO kind of has on their shoulders?
Yeah, first of all, I wouldn't be a CISO in this environment. I mean, I think it's too dangerous because you take on all of the responsibility and have none of the control, right? So we've seen the Department of Justice, we've seen the FTC, we've seen the SEC come after CISOs for cybersecurity incidents, but the CISOs themselves didn't have control over those environments. They were limited on what they could spend. They couldn't get people to take cybersecurity seriously, and so they just became the scapegoat. And I think that that's a fundamental problem in our industry. I mean, if you're going to have the responsibility, then you need the control, and otherwise, give the responsibility up to somebody else who does have that control. Go back to Harry Truman. Where does the buck stop? The buck stops at the desk of the president, is how he used to put it. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
really myself. He was still alive when I was a kid. So wow, I'm old. But yeah, who has ultimate responsibility? It's not the CISO because they don't have control, right? They are recommender. They provide guidance, but um, you know they just really they're trying to do their best, and I think they're really hampered by a lot of legacy thinking up above them in the C-suite.
Yeah, yeah, and it's. I mean, I think cybersecurity in general now it's become a board level topic, but I think that's kind of a new chapter for us where it is getting that exposure at that level. Even though we've always had pretty healthy budgets and things like that, I do feel like it's even further more highlighted just because it's in the news all the time and people are aware of like the genuine threat it poses. What are you seeing as far as from like those board level conversations, like cyber trends of conversation or changes in organizations based on those directives from the highest level?
I'm seeing boards ask more questions and want to get some information, but I don't think they're going deep enough, and I don't think they're asking the right people necessarily. So
Mm-hmm.
we're beginning the movement in the right direction, but they still just want perfunctory information, and then what they really want to hear is everything's fine, right? And a couple of things that I've been around, they get kind of irritated when they find out it's not, right? So you have to surround yourself with people who are willing to give you the true answer and not the answer that you want to hear. And a lot of leaders are just not to that point yet, especially in cybersecurity.
Right, right. Yeah, especially if they don't feel that they can actually materially impact it too. Um, they don't necessarily want to hear they don't want to hear those things. So that's really a very unique insight, John. So we appreciate that. Before we wrap up our session, I don't want to let you off the line because this is so interesting. Just all the insights that you have are really so valuable for all of us. But is there a couple things that you want to leave with our viewers as far as how they can take steps to secure their environments, leveraging zero trust principles from your perspective?
Yeah, you ask the first question first, which is what am I trying to protect? You know, not what product should I buy? And that's hard. I mean, you know, I'm a vendor, you're at a reseller. We're all, conditioned to start with products. But really, the answer is what am I trying to protect? And then that will tell you the right way to protect it. And that will tell you the right product. And sometimes it'll be my product and sometimes it won't. And that's just the way the game works. But it's so important that we have to do it the right way. And so I think we made a really big error in our business when we went from information security to cybersecurity. Because when we were information security, what do we secure? Information. Great. Okay. I can kind of understand that. Now we're cybersecurity. What's a cyber? Why should we protect it? No one knows, right? So we've just made it even harder to convince people that we are doing something valuable because we wanted to sound cool. And it's such a shame that we did that. And I was watching that transition and fighting against it. I even wrote a report about it in when I was at Forrester Research,
Yeah.
and it was just this train wreck coming down the pike because everybody wanted to sound like they were in a Neil Stevenson novel or something,
It's funny and it's true. I'm sorry, I have to hit you with one more question before you go. What did you feel like the response was from the industry when you initially started talking about zero trust?
Oh, yeah, let's say there were a lot of people who were not happy about that. I mean, I was made fun of to my face many times. I was told it would never work. Functionally, you're a moron, those kinds of things, although not said that nicely. But I had spent 2 years doing primary research, and I had enough technical acumen to know that this was going to work.
Yeah.
And I had some really, really important people behind the scenes encouraging me. So when people were saying there's nobody doing zero trust, I'm like, yeah, zero trust is this iceberg, and what you see is the tippy top of it. And way down below it, there's a lot of stuff going on that's super important that you don't know about.
Mhm.
Uh, I'll never tell you about it. They'll never tell you about it. And what's happened since the presidential executive order is that iceberg's floating higher and higher in the water every day. And so that's what we're starting to see. But yeah, I've had people make fun of me, and I've had people try to stop the research going forward at Forrester, and Forrester was always very supportive of the research. So I've seen all kinds of things. I've been asked every question. I've had people um, make fun of me, and that's cool. That's fine. It just renewed every day my tenacity to see this move forward because I knew it would succeed for the betterment of society. And so I'm a mission driven person. And
Mhm.
that was my mission. It's still my mission. It will probably be the mission until, I croak doing a webinar, sometime in the future. I'll just fall down flat on my face on the keyboard.
Please stop manifesting that. Oh my God. Well, thank you for continuing to trudge on for the betterment of all of us, for the industry, for the consumers. It was an absolute joy talking with you. And thank you so much for being a guest.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. And looking forward to continue these discussions.
Wonderful. Thanks, John.
You bet.